Welcome to reform thinking. Usually when we look at a massive, thriving civilization, there's this expectation of absolute permanence.
It's just always going to be there.
Yeah, think about standing in the middle of a modern metropolis today. You look up at the skyscrapers, you see the steel, the reinforced glass, the bustling financial districts. I mean, the sheer volume of commerce happening in real time. And you just assume this structure is solid.
It feels indestructible.
It really does. Human achievement loves to be visible. We like our success to be something we can measure, something we can put our hands on. Concrete and steel give us this overwhelming, albeit false, sense of absolute control over our environment.
Oh, for sure. We want to believe we're in charge.
Yeah, we want to believe that our storehouses, our supply chains, our technology, and, our bank accounts can insulate us from the wild unpredictability of the natural world. But then you step into the ancient world of Genesis, specifically looking at the undisputed breadbasket of the globe, and suddenly that skyscraper is collapsing.
It just falls apart.
It does. We're looking at an agricultural and economic landscape that goes from total unprecedented abundance to terrifying devastation, like overnight. So today we are taking a deep dive into a text that seems quite small on the surface.
Just a few verses, right?
Yeah, a 5-verse passage, Genesis 41.5357. The commentaries we are pulling from today unpack the end of Egypt's 7 years of plenty and the terrifying onset of a global famine. The mission today is to extract the massive theological weight of this text.
Which is heavy. There's a lot there.
So much. We are examining how a historical agricultural crisis acts as a window into divine providence, human inability, and the necessity of a mediator. We are looking past the surface-level story of Joseph storing grain to see the massive architectural decisions God makes in human history. Okay, let's unpack this.
The sheer scale of what is happening in this text is staggering. We have to start by getting our bearings in the historical reality. We're not just looking at a bad harvest here.
Right, it's not a local issue.
No, this is not a minor localized drought where one region has to, import some wheat from a neighboring country. We are looking at an event where the entire known world is brought to its absolute knees.
Wow.
To understand why this is so catastrophic, you have to picture the historical context. We are situated in ancient Egypt during the patriarchal era, so roughly the early 2nd millennium BC.
Okay, setting the stage.
Right. During this era, Egypt is the undisputed agricultural champion of the ancient world. They are completely reliant on the annual inundation of the Nile River rather than local rainfall.
So they don't even need it to rain where they are.
Not really, no. It is a very specific hydrological system. The monsoon rains of the Ethiopian highlands feed the Blue Nile, which surges and floods the banks of the river in Egypt every single year.
Like clockwork.
Highly reliable, yeah. When the Nile floods, it deposits this nutrient-dense silt across land, guaranteeing a massive, incredibly reliable crop yield. It's an engine of wealth.
But if it doesn't flood?
If the Nile fails to flood, the entire machine grinds to a halt. The water does not arrive. The silt is not deposited, the ground turns to cracked clay, and the most advanced society on Earth begins to starve.
And that is a terrifying reality even today. I mean, we tend to look back at ancient civilizations and think of them as primitive, assuming they were naturally more vulnerable to the elements than we are.
Oh, we love to flatter ourselves like
We do. But to ground this ancient text in a modern reality, look at the statistics regarding global food supply right now. According to the World Food Program, over 333 million people globally face acute food insecurity today.
That number is just, it's hard to even wrap your mind around.
333 million. When you hear a number like that, it strips away the illusion of human self-sufficiency. We like to think that with all our modern technology, our satellite weather tracking, our genetic crop modifications,
Our global supply chains.
yeah, all of it, we think we have outgrown the vulnerability of the ancient world. But the reality is that we are just as fragile. We just hide it better when the grocery store shelves are full.
Right, until they aren't.
Exactly. Think about what happens today when a supply chain breaks or a major shipping canal is blocked. You go to the grocery store and the shelves are bare. Suddenly, all that money in your bank account feels completely useless.
You cannot eat digital currency.
No, you can't. And the commentaries we are reading point this out forcefully. They defend the literal historicity of this event, pushing back hard against liberal critical theology that tries to mythologize the patriarchs.
They treat it as a literal, verifiable historical crisis.
Which it was. But I want to push on something here. There is a secular evolutionary view of history that treats natural disasters as random accidents within a closed cosmic system.
Yeah, the idea that it's all just chance.
Right, it is just bad luck, a shift in tectonic plates, or a random meteorological anomaly. How does this specific text completely shatter the idea that history is just a series of random, unguided ecological events?
That is the crucial tension. The secular worldview demands that the universe is a closed system of cause and effect, where anomalies like a 7-year famine are just statistical bad luck.
It's just a roll of the dice.
Right. But what's fascinating here is that the text insists God is intimately, directly orchestrating the climate, the hydrology of the Nile, and the resulting geopolitical structures.
He's moving all the pieces.
He is. The famine is not a random ecological glitch. It is a divine decree, and it have a highly specific surgical target. God is orchestrating this massive global catastrophe to drive the specific seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob into the geographical womb of Goshen.
He's preserving the covenant line.
Yes, he is moving nations, causing rivers to dry up, and bringing mighty empires to a standstill just to secure the microscopic details of his promises.
Wow. Okay, break that down geographically for us.
Well, if Israel stayed in Canaan, a land that relied heavily on local rainfall, they would have starved.
Yeah.
But beyond that, if they stayed in Canaan, they would have assimilated.
Ah, they would have blended in.
Right. They would have intermarried with the Canaanites, adopting their pagan practices, and the distinct line of the Messiah would have been compromised. So God uses a global famine to force them out of Canaan and into Egypt, specifically into the land of Goshen.
Which was separate.
Very separate. The Egyptians despised shepherds, so they isolated the Israelites in Goshen. That cultural prejudice actually protected Israel, keeping them separated so they could multiply into a massive nation over the next 400 years.
Wait, I want to linger on that for a second because it is such a massive paradigm shift.
Huh?
You are saying God utilized a global, catastrophic famine, an event that likely caused untold suffering across multiple nations, just to move one specific family of shepherds into a specific zip code in Egypt to incubate them.
That is what the text is showing us.
That level of sovereignty is hard for the modern mind to grasp. It feels disproportionate. Why wouldn't God just miraculously sustain them in Canaan without the famine? Why use such a massive global mechanism for a local family?
It does feel disproportionate to our modern sensibilities, but that is because we tend to view history anthropocentrically, centered on man.
Right, we put ourselves at the center of the story.
We do. But the biblical worldview is theocentric. The entire cosmos exists to execute the decrees of God and to glorify the Son. God uses ordinary, albeit massive, means to accomplish his will because he is sovereign over the macro and the micro simultaneously.
He handles the big picture and the tiny details.
Yeah. He does not just ordain the end result, he ordains the precise means to achieve it. The famine is the mechanism. It strips away the self-reliance of the surrounding nations, humbles the greatest empire on earth, elevates the appointed mediator in Joseph, and positions the covenant family precisely where they need to be.
It is a terrifying display of authority, but it is absolute.
It is absolute.
Let us move to the actual text and look at the grammar of this famine because the Hebrew phrasing here is incredibly deliberate. Genesis 41.54 says the famine began according as Joseph had said.
That phrasing is key.
It makes me think of like coding a massive video game engine. God is not just playing the game and reacting to the characters on the screen. He coded the physics engine itself.
I love that analogy.
Right. The characters are making real choices. They are moving around the map, but they are operating within a system where the exact parameters and the final cutscene have already been programmed into the hard drive.
It's locked in.
Yeah, Joseph was not making a highly educated guess about meteorological trends. It was an infallible declaration because the developer had already written the code. The timeline was completely fixed.
Oh, that is a fantastic way to visualize it. And, the vocabulary used in the Hebrew text carries immense weight here. The Hebrew noun used is rohab, which translates to famine or hunger.
Okay, Roab.
Yeah. Now, if you look at extra-biblical, ancient Near Eastern texts like the Ugaritic records detailing the mythology of Baal and Mot, or various Egyptian documents, famine was typically blamed on capricious, localized deities throwing a tantrum.
Like the gods were just in a bad mood today.
Right, the gods were angry, so they withheld the rain. But here, the Hebrew syntax is driven by something called the wa consecutive.
The wa consecutive. What is that for those of us who aren't Hebrew scholars?
Well, in Hebrew grammar, the wa consecutive is not just a simple conjunction like the English word and. It acts like a grammatical freight train.
A freight train.
Yeah, it tightly links a sequence of events so forcefully that it removes any room for coincidence or random chance. It is the grammar of inevitability. Yahweh is the one commanding the famine. It happened, according as Joseph had said, because Yahweh had decreed it.
And the commentaries connect this grammatical certainty to a much broader theological framework. They tie this directly into the debates over divine providence.
Yes, specifically, they reference how this text aligns with chapter 3 of the Westminster Confession, which deals with God's eternal decrees.
Which is a huge topic.
Massive. This text directly confronts theological concepts like open theism or Arminianism. Let us define those terms so the mechanics of the debate are clear for you, the listener.
Yeah, please do.
Open theism suggests God is watching the future unfold and reacting to it. In that view, God does not know the future perfectly because the future is made of free choices that have not happened yet.
So God is just sort of guessing along with us.
Right. And then Arminianism might suggest God merely looks down the corridors of time to see what humans will choose and then bases his plan on that foreseen knowledge.
He sees what we do and then plans around it.
Yeah, but Genesis 41 completely refutes both of those ideas. God does not guess. He does not react. He does not merely foresee. He ordains the 7 years of plenty, and he ordains the 7 years of famine.
He decreed it.
He decreed it. The timeline does not shift based on human behavior. The decree is fixed.
We see a stark contrast play out right after the famine hits. There is an antithetical parallelism in the text. The dearth was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread.
That contrast is so sharp.
It really is. You have the entire globe starving, the ground turning to dust, and then you have this one geographical location holding the only food supply. Total starvation on one side, absolute provision on the other.
And even with bread stored in Egypt, the text points out that the land of Egypt itself was famished.
Oh, so they were feeling it too.
Big time. The people felt the agonizing reality of the famine before the storehouses were opened. The Hebrew word used when the people cried to Pharaoh is sah.
Suck.
Yeah, this is word denoting deep agony. It's the cry of absolute desperation, the kind of sound a population makes when they realize their children are going to starve.
That is just heartbreaking to imagine.
It is, and here we see the hard limits of royal authority. Pharaoh is the supreme political and religious authority in Egypt. He is considered a literal god by his people.
Now he has absolute power.
He controls the military, the architecture, and the economy. But he is utterly incapable of creating a single grain of wheat out of nothing. Hunger humbles earthly authority completely.
You have to imagine Pharaoh, essentially viewed as a living deity, looking at his royal advisors and realizing his only economic strategy is to rely on a Hebrew shepherd he just pulled out of a dungeon.
Yeah, it had to sting.
It is a massive blow to the royal ego. But looking at the text, if all the wealth, all the intellect, and all the military might of Egypt could not produce a single grain of wheat without the appointed storehouse, how does that mirror our spiritual condition? The commentaries make a strong theological assertion about total human inability here, and I want to understand the mechanics of that connection.
It perfectly mirrors the core of the human problem. Human flesh is completely bankrupt.
Bankrupt.
Yes. The physical body's desperate need for bread operates as a loud, undeniable sermon against human autonomy. We love to believe we are the masters of our fate. We build our portfolios, we invest in health regimens, and we curate our lives to feel independent.
We try to build our own little storehouses.
Exactly. But a failed harvest proves that humanity cannot manufacture its own salvation or its own survival. When the heavens shut their doors, all the gold in Pharaoh's treasury is useless.
You can't eat gold.
You can't. The physical starvation in Egypt points to the spiritual reality of total depravity. Total depravity does not mean humans are as evil as they could possibly be. It means that every part of the human condition is affected by sin, leaving us totally unable to generate our own righteousness or save ourselves.
We are spiritually starving.
We are. Think about what happens when a natural disaster hits a modern city. It strips away the illusion that we are independent creatures. It reveals that we are entirely continuously dependent on the provision of our Creator for every breath and every meal. What stands out to you when you think about how fragile we really are?
What stands out to me is how fast that realization hits. I mean, when the grocery stores empty out, it doesn't take winks for panic to set in. It takes hours.
Right, the facade drops instantly.
And when the Egyptians are pushed to that point of total bankruptcy, Pharaoh gives them a very specific directive. He tells the starving masses, "Go unto Joseph what he saith to you, do."
The Hebrew verb used when people go to buy grain is shabar. Because of this, Joseph acts as the mashbir, the exclusive provider or seller of grain.
The mash beer.
Yes, he holds an absolute monopoly on life. There is no competitor. No one else has a secondary vault you can visit if you do not like Joseph's terms.
No plan B.
No backup plan at all. If you want to survive, you go to the appointed mediator.
Huh.
We also have to look at the syntax of salvation here. The text uses the hifil stem of the verb opened, which is way imtak.
Okay, the hifil stem, what does that signify?
In Hebrew, the hifil stem indicates causative action. It means Joseph caused the storehouses to be opened. He's not just a passive bystander watching the doors open. He is the active, appointed agent of provision. He turns the key.
Think about a modern-day global outbreak of a terrifying, highly contagious disease. The hospitals are overflowing, the governments are panicking, the economy has crashed, and there is only one person on Earth who holds the only set of keys to the only vault containing the antidote.
That's the setup.
Right. You cannot negotiate with the vault itself. You cannot offer alternative medicine. You cannot bribe the guards. You have to go to the specific person who holds the keys.
And that is Joseph's position in this historical moment.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. God uses very ordinary administrative means to execute this divine providence. He uses public administration, counting grain, building silos, and economic transactions.
Yeah, the commentaries point out that God's sovereignty does not negate human action. It gives human action its actual meaning.
Say more about that.
Well, Joseph's wise administration, his architectural planning for the silos, and his logistical brilliance were tools in the hand of providence. God decreed the end, the survival of the covenant line, and he decreed the means, Joseph's meticulous administration of the Egyptian grain surplus.
So it's not either.
Right. This answers the tension people often feel between predestination and human responsibility. Joseph worked exhaustively for 7 years. He did not just sit back and wait for God to magically multiply the grain.
He rolled up his sleeves.
He gathered it, he stored it, he distributed it. The divine decree was executed through rigorous human effort.
That shows us how careful we need to be when looking at biblical history and finding connections. The narrative pattern here is undeniably typological, moving from Joseph to Jesus. But the authors of these commentaries are quick to warn against turning every detail into an artificial medieval allegory.
Yeah, you can't push it too far.
No, you can't just say that grain mechanically equals grace, or that every single brick in the storehouse represents a specific doctrine, or that the carts represent the church. When you stretch a metaphor that far, it breaks.
It totally breaks down.
But the overarching historical pattern is clearly designed by God to point us forward.
The typology is robust, but it requires precision. Typology is not about finding secret codes. It is about recognizing patterns of redemption that God establishes in history.
Right.
The most striking gospel echo in this entire passage is found in Pharaoh's command. Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do.
That sounds so familiar.
It should. If we look at the New Testament, we hear the exact same structural command from the voice of God the Father concerning God the Son at the Transfiguration in Matthew 17:5.
Oh, wow.
The Father speaks from the cloud and says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." The Father appoints the Son as the exclusive mediator, just as Pharaoh appointed Joseph. You cannot bypass the appointed mediator to get to the provision. You must deal with the Son.
I do want to push back on the parallel, though, or at least examine the contrast the commentaries bring up. Because as much as Joseph acts as a type of Christ, there is a sharp difference that elevates the gospel far above the historical event in Egypt.
A very sharp difference.
Joseph provided temporary physical salvation. He kept people from starving for a few years. But he also sold the grain to the people. He did not give it away.
Right, it was a transaction.
Yeah, reading further into Genesis, we see that the people spent all their money buying grain. When the money ran out, they traded their livestock. When the livestock ran out, they traded their land. And eventually, they sold themselves into servitude to Pharaoh just to get enough bread to survive.
It was a brutal economic reality.
It really was. So how does Christ's provision fundamentally differ from the provision Joseph offered?
That contrast is vital and is where the gospel shines brightest. Jesus Christ is the true bread of life, as he declares in John 6:35. While Joseph's grain only postponed physical death for a generation, Christ's storehouse of grace offers eternal life.
And it's not a transaction.
Right, it's not. Crucially, Christ does not sell the bread. He gives this life freely to bankrupt sinners, having purchased it completely with his own blood. He does not demand our money, our livestock, or our land because we are already completely bankrupt.
We have nothing to offer.
Nothing. He does not bring us into oppressive servitude to an earthly king. He brings us into sonship with the creator of the universe. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the world today is starving under the devastating curse of sin, and Christ holds the exclusive keys to infinite electing grace.
The only keys.
The physical famine in the ancient world points directly to the terrifying reality of a spiritual famine today, a famine of hearing the words of the Lord.
Which brings us to some very strong polemical applications made by the commentaries. They draw sharp, urgent lines against modern theological and cultural movements based on this text. First, they aggressively reject the prosperity gospel.
They do not hold back on that.
Not at all. Joseph's obedience and faithfulness did not prevent the famine from hitting Egypt. God often matures his people through want and deprivation. The false promises of perpetual health and wealth just do not hold up to the reality of the biblical text.
The text completely dismantles the prosperity gospel. The man God exalted to the second highest position in the empire still had to lead his people through 7 years of brutal starvation. God did not exempt Joseph from the crisis. He sustained him through it.
That's a crucial distinction. Sustained through it, not exempted from it.
Right. Furthermore, the commentaries outline a massive critique of seeker-sensitive church models.
Okay, let's look at that.
These are models that try to offer the junk food of entertainment, self-help pep talks, and laser light shows rather than the solid bread of the Word of God.
Junk food.
Yeah, when people are genuinely starving, a light show does not save them. Only grain saves them. The church's mandate is to distribute the grain, not to entertain the starving masses.
That is a heavy conviction.
They also fiercely reject pluralism, which is the false comfort that there are many storehouses or many paths to God. Pharaoh did not look at the starving Egyptians and say, "Find your own truth. Seek whatever storehouse resonates with your personal journey."
Right, he didn't say that at all.
He said, "Go to Joseph." The gospel says there is one mediator between God and man.
It's worth noting how these commentaries apply this ancient text to highly polarizing modern debates. And to you listening, we are just imparting the facts of the source material here. Whether you agree with their stance or not, the authors argue heavily against modern Marxist iterations of critical race theory, insisting that these frameworks are designed to divide the church based on worldly categories.
Right, they see it as a major distraction.
Yeah, the argument presented is that the church's singular focus must remain entirely on proclaiming the bread of life, rather than getting derailed by political or sociological agendas that cannot save the soul. Again, we're simply looking at how the authors apply the exclusivity of the true storehouse to modern cultural debates. The point they are driving home is that anything other than Christ is an empty silo.
The authors are making a strong case for the absolute exclusivity and sufficiency of the biblical gospel. They also direct this critique toward Roman Catholicism, rejecting the concept of a treasury of merits or a treasury of sacraments mediated by a church hierarchy.
So bypassing human mediators.
Yes. The biblical text insists on faith alone in Christ alone. Christ himself is the storehouse, and he distributes grace freely, directly to the believer. You do not need a secondary mediator to get to the primary mediator.
That makes total sense.
And finally, the commentaries tie Pharaoh's command, whatever he says to you do, to the third use of the law from chapter 19 of the Westminster Confession.
Okay, what does the third use of the law actually mean in practice? Break that down for us.
It means that salvation by grace alone does not result in lawlessness. Historically, theologians have categorized the law into 3 uses.
Okay, 3 uses.
The first use is to restrain evil in society. The second use is to act as a mirror, showing us our sin and driving us to Christ.
And the third?
The third use is the law as a guide for Christian living. Because Christ has freely saved us, because he has fed our starving souls from his infinite storehouse without demanding payment, we respond with absolute grateful submission to his lordship. We do what he says.
It's a response of love.
Exactly. Actually, right, that is. We do not obey the law to earn the bread, because we already have the bread. We obey because we love the one who fed us.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with a literal historical drought in the ancient Near East, examining the precise hydrology of the Nile River.
The Ethiopian highlands and all that.
Yeah. We looked at the intricate Hebrew grammar, unpacking how the forceful wa consecutive proves that God decrees the end from the beginning, completely refuting open theism. We analyzed the total bankruptcy of human flesh, likening it to an empty bank account during a supply chain collapse.
That terrifying thought.
Very. And finally, we arrived at the absolute exclusivity of Christ as the only appointed mediator holding the keys to the antidote for a spiritually starving world. 5 short verses carry the weight of the entire redemptive timeline. So what does this all mean?
This raises a big question for you to mull over. The source material argues that famine is a mechanism that exposes illusions and forces decisions. Famines strip away our pretend security. What if a sudden famine in your own life, a sudden loss of financial security, a severe decline in health, or the collapse of a certainty you built your entire identity around, is not a random tragedy? What if it is a highly engineered, providential mechanism designed specifically to force you to abandon your self-reliance and seek the one true storehouse you have been ignoring?
That brings us right back to that skyscraper we talked about at the beginning. When the glass shatters and the steel bends, it is terrifying. The collapse of our illusions always hurts. But if that collapse is the very thing that drives you to the only true vault, the only true provision, then the destruction of that illusion is an act of absolute mercy. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive on Reformed thinking. We invite you to continue evaluating the scriptures with a careful analytical eye.